In a world where destiny is written in blood, where power decides justice, and legends are born through pain, one story dared to ask, what if things were different? Welcome to Will of Fire Stories, a place where timelines break, fates are rewritten, and the will of fire burns stronger than ever. This is not just a story. This is a what if. Chapter 1. The Golden Throne of Konoha. The Fourth Shinobi World War had ended not with a simple peace treaty, but with a fundamental shift in the tectonic plates of power. Naruto Uzumaki did not just become the Hokage. He became the sun around which the entire world began to orbit. The five nations, exhausted by cycles of hatred, looked at the boy who held the power of all nine-tailed beasts and saw more than a hero, they saw a sovereign. Naruto sat within the newly reconstructed Hokage office, though it resembled a palace more than a workspace. The mahogany desk was wide enough to map out continents. Outside, the village of Konoha had expanded, its walls stretching miles further than they ever had in the days of the third or fourth. You're brooding again, Naruto-kun. The voice was like silk. Hi, Nata Hyuga stepped from the shadows of the room, her gait graceful and confident. She no longer wore the bulky flak jacket of a chunin. Instead, she was draped in royal purple silks embroidered with the Uzumaki swirl and the Hyuga flame. As the primary consort and the moon of the empire, her influence over the internal affairs of the Land of Fire was absolute. Naruto leaned back, his eyes, once purely blue, now shimmering with a permanent gold tint from his constant harmony with Kurama, softened. It's not brooding, Hinata. It's just the silence. It's different than it used to be. It is the silence of submission. A sharper voice interrupted. Ino Yamanaka walked in, flipping a clipboard onto the desk. As the head of intelligence and communications for the unified shinobi nations, she was the bridge between Naruto's will and the minds of the populace. She wore a high-collared crimson dress that signaled her status. The hidden sand has finished the tribute delivery. Temari is waiting in the gardens. She says if you don't see her by sundown, she'll blow the roof off the palace. Naruto chuckled, a sound that felt heavy with the weight of his crown. Temari always did have a temper. Is Gaara settling into his role as the High Governor? He has no choice, Ino said, leaning over the desk, her eyes sparkling with a mix of duty and affection. You saved them, you fed them when the droughts hit. The people don't want a cage anymore, they want the protection of the Orange Emperor. This was the reality of Naruto's new world order. It wasn't just a military dictatorship, it was a dynasty built on the deep personal bonds Naruto had forged with the most powerful women of the generation. They weren't just his partners, they were his ministers, his generals, and his eyes. Sakura Haruno entered next, her brow furrowed as she looked over medical scrolls. As the director of the Global Healing Initiative, she had revolutionized the way chakra was used for longevity. The rejuvenation seals are holding, Naruto. The elders in the council won't be dying of old age anytime soon, which means we have stability for at least another century. She paused, looking at the three of them. But we have a problem in the Land of Water. Mei Terumi is reporting unrest. Some of the old Seven Swordsman clans think your harem of governance is a sign of weakness. They think you've grown soft in your luxury. Naruto stood up, his orange and black cloak, now long and flowing like a regal robe, flared behind him. The air in the room grew heavy, the sheer pressure of his chakra making the floorboards groan. It wasn't the malicious red chakra of the past, but a pure, blinding light. Soft? Naruto asked, a small, dangerous smile playing on his lips. I've brought peace to a world that only knew blood. If they want to see the power that maintains that peace, I'll show them. Sakura, prepare the transport. Hinata, I want the Hyuga scouts ready. We're going to Kiri. And what of us? Ino asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. Naruto looked at the women who stood by him, the pillars of his empire. You are the reason this world functions. Without you, I'm just a weapon. With you, I am a king. Tell the world that the emperor is coming to visit his borders. As the sun set over the sprawling metropolis of Konoha, the banners of the Uzumaki waved high. The era of the hidden villages was over. The era of the empire had begun, and it was a reign fueled by loyalty, love, and the undisputed power of the man who turned his loneliness into a legend. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Tides of Subjugation. The Imperial Dreadnought, the Will of Fire, sliced through the choppy gray waters of the Land of Water like a kunai through silk. It was a massive vessel, powered by a fusion of Uzumaki sealing formulas and Kiri's hydro tech, serving as a floating fortress for the emperor and his court. Naruto stood at the prow, the salt spray misting his face. Beside him stood Temari, the high governor of the sand. Her golden hair windswept. She wasn't one for the formal silks of the Konoha court. She wore her battle-ready kimono, a giant folding fan strapped to her back. "You're thinking about the blood, aren't you?" Temari asked, her voice cutting through the roar of the ocean. "I'm thinking about how many times I fought Zabuza and Haku in these mists," Naruto replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the jagged cliffs of Kurigakure were beginning to emerge. "Back then, it was just survival. Now, I have to decide if a whole culture needs to be dismantled to keep them from killing each other." Temari scoffed, leaning against the railing. "The mist only respects strength, Naruto. You know that. They see your harem as a collection of trophies, not as the council of geniuses we actually are. They think you've traded your kunai for silk sheets. Let them think what they want," a voice purred from the cabin doorway. Mei Terumi, the former Mizukage and now the sovereign regent of the Isles, stepped onto the deck. She looked as radiant as ever, though there was a sharpness in her eyes that spoke of the political tightrope she walked. Behind her followed Karui of the Cloud, representing the interests of the Land of Lightning. "The rebel factions are led by a man named Shizuma," Mei explained, unrolling a map on a stone plinth. "He wants to restore the Bloody Mist era. He thinks your peace is a sickness that makes shinobi weak. He's gathered the remnants of the 7 swordsman clans in the Great Chasm." Karui cracked her knuckles, a fierce grin on her face. "Sounds like they need a reminder of what weak looks like. My lightning style and your tailed beast chakra should shut them up pretty quick, Naruto." "No," Naruto said firmly. "If I go in there and level the canyon, I'm just a tyrant. This needs to be a demonstration of the new order." That night, as the ship anchored in the hidden harbor of Kiri, Naruto held court in the grand stateroom. The atmosphere was thick with more than just political tension. The women surrounding him, his pillars of power, each held a different piece of the world's soul. Hinata was the heart, Sakura the lifeblood, Ino the mind, and Temari the iron will. As the meeting wound down, Mei lingered. She approached Naruto, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "The people of Kiri are afraid, Naruto. Not of you, but of losing their identity. They need to see that their Mizukage hasn't just surrendered to a man, but has joined a god." "I'm no god, Mei," Naruto sighed, though the golden flicker in his eyes betrayed he sheer volume of chakra humming beneath his skin. "To them, there is no difference," she whispered. The next morning, the Imperial Party moved toward the Great Chasm. Instead of an army, Naruto walked with his consorts. When they reached the edge of the ravine, hundreds of rebel shinobi emerged from the mist, brandishing jagged blades and wearing the old, blood-stained masks of the hunter nin. Shizuma stepped forward, laughing. "The great Uzumaki, come to hide behind his women. Which one of them carries your sword today, Emperor?" Naruto didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even enter a combat stance. He simply took a step forward. "I didn't come here to fight you," Naruto's voice echoed, amplified by sage chakra so that it felt like it was coming from the earth itself. "I came to show you the world you're trying to throw away." With a nod from Naruto, the women moved. Hinata's Byakugan flared, and with a single palm strike to the air, the vacuum of her lion fist cleared the entire mist for miles, exposing the rebels to the blinding sun. Sakura struck the ground, not to kill, but to reshape the geography, raising a massive stone dais that trapped the rebels in a bowl of solid rock. Ino's mind transmission linked every rebel's consciousness to Naruto's, forcing them to feel, not his anger, but his overwhelming loneliness as a child, followed by the warmth of the bonds he now held. The rebels fell to their knees, some weeping, some simply catatonic from the sheer emotional weight. Naruto walked down the newly formed stone stairs. He stopped in front of Shizuma, who was trembling, his sword heavy in his hand. "This isn't a harem," Naruto said, his voice low and terrifyingly calm. "This is my family, and in my world, family doesn't let family bleed for nothing. You want the bloody mist back? You'll have to go through them first. But look at them, Shizuma. Do they look like they're losing?" Shizuma looked up at the ridge. Above him stood the most powerful women in the world, silhouetted against the sun. Their expressions not of malice, but of absolute, unshakable authority. The sword slipped from Shizuma's hand. We didn't know. Now you do," Naruto said, extending a hand to pull the man up. "Kiri is part of the empire now. Not as a conquered territory, but as a limb of the body. Mei will continue to lead you, but the blood stops here. That evening, a grand feast was held in the heart of Kurigakure. The rebellion had been snuffed out without a single death. As the celebration roared, Naruto stood on a balcony overlooking the sea. Hinata joined him, slipping her hand into his. You handled that well, but you know the other nations will hear of this. They'll see it as a show of force. Good, Naruto said, turning to look at his moon. Because the land of Earth is next. And Onoki's successor won't be as easy to convince as a few hot-headed swordsmen. He pulled her closer, the weight of the crown feeling a little lighter with her by his side. The world was changing, and though the path was paved with the complexities of his new life, the Golden Emperor knew that as long as his pillars held, his empire would never fall. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Stone's Defiance. The transition from the humid, salt-slicked air of the land of water to the arid, jagged plateaus of the land of earth was a testament to the sheer scale of Naruto's reach. The imperial caravan did not travel by foot, they traveled by a massive, chakra-levitated platform, a marvel designed by the combined intellect of Sakura's chakra control theories and the R&D teams of the Hidden Cloud. Kuretsuchi, the fourth Tsuchikage, did not meet them at the border. Instead, she waited at the summit of the Iron Bastion, a fortress carved into the very mountain that overlooked Iwagakure. She's stubborn, Temari remarked, sharpening a small kunai out of habit as the platform ascended through the clouds. The stone has always been the hardest to crack. They pride themselves on being unmoving. They see your unification as a threat to their sovereignty, Naruto. Naruto was dressed in a lighter version of his imperial robes, the back emblazoned with the combined STS of the Uzumaki and the allied shinobi forces. Beside him, Konan, who had joined the court as the representative of the Hidden Rain and the Angel of the Empire, watched the horizon. Her paper wings were tucked neatly behind her back, but her piercing amber eyes missed nothing. Stubbornness is just a shield for fear, Konan said softly. They fear that in your world, the stone will be ground into dust. They don't realize that dust is what allows new things to grow. As the platform docked with the fortress, the air was cold and thin. Kuretsuchi stood waiting, flanked by hundreds of stone-faced shinobi. Her arms were crossed, her gaze defiant. The Emperor arrives, Kuretsuchi said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I expected more dragons and less decoration. She gestured vaguely to the women surrounding Naruto. Sakura stepped forward, her medical nin seal glowing faintly on her forehead. We aren't decorations, Kuretsuchi. We are the architects of the peace you're currently enjoying. Unless you'd prefer to go back to the days when Iwa and Kumo were at each other's throats every Tuesday. Kuretsuchi's eyes narrowed. I prefer a world where the Tsuchikage doesn't have to ask permission from a king to mine her own mountains. You've centralized the missions, the trade, and the chakra metal distribution. You're strangling us, Naruto. Naruto stepped past his guards, walking right up to the edge of the Tsuchikage's personal space. He didn't look angry, he looked tired. I'm not strangling you, Kuretsuchi. I'm connecting you. The stone has the best infrastructure, but you have no food. The land of wind has the space, but no water. I'm just the bridge. Bridges get walked on, Kuretsuchi snapped. I won't have my people become footstools for your legendary harem. The word, harem, hung in the air like a challenge. Ino stepped out from the group, a playful but dangerous smile on her face. You keep using that word like it's a slur, Kuretsuchi. Is it because you're jealous you weren't invited to the inner circle? Or because you're afraid that if you join us, you'll realize we're actually getting things done while you're busy pouting on a rock? The tension snapped. Kuretsuchi lunged, her fist encased in rock, the added weight rock technique. It was a strike meant to shatter bones. Naruto didn't move. Hinata appeared in a blur of motion, her palms glowing with the twin lion fists. She didn't strike Kuretsuchi, she simply parried the blow, the gentle fist style neutralizing the kinetic energy of the heavy rock strike instantly. The shockwave cracked the stone floor beneath them, but Naruto didn't even blink. That's enough, Naruto said. His voice wasn't loud, but it contained the resonance of the four tails lava and the one tail's sand. He looked at Kuretsuchi, who was breathing hard, her fist still pressed against Hinata's palm. You want to prove the stone is independent? Fine. A wager. You against my council, not in a fight of blood, but in a trial of the land. Naruto pointed to the Great Desolation, a vast, barren wasteland outside the city that had been scorched during the war and had never recovered. If my decorations can make that wasteland bloom in a single night, You join the Empire fully, no more withholding resources, no more border skirmishes. If they fail, I leave Iwa alone forever. I'll even give you the trade routes you want. Kuretsuchi laughed. That land is dead, Naruto. Even the Sage of Six Paths couldn't make life grow in that salt-choked dirt. Do we have a deal? Naruto asked. Deal, Kuretsuchi spat. That night, the Empire went to work. This wasn't a display of taijutsu or ninjutsu, it was a display of goddess-level coordination. Sakura took the center, her diamond seal releasing a massive surge of life-giving chakra into the soil, breaking down the toxins at a cellular level. Ino linked the minds of 1,000 Earth-style users provided by the Empire, coordinating their movements to churn the Earth perfectly. Conan rained down paper scrolls infused with concentrated nutrients and water seals, creating a controlled, artificial monsoon. Finally, Naruto sat in the center of them all, acting as the battery. He channeled the Six Paths Sage Chakra, the energy of creation itself, and filtered it through the women. By dawn, the great desolation was gone. In its place was a lush, emerald forest, with trees bearing fruit that shimmered with chakra. A river, diverted and purified, sang through the center of the new valley. Kuretsuchi stood on the ramparts, her jaw dropped. The unmoving Tsuchikage fell to her knees as she watched her people, starving for years due to the harsh mountain winters, run into the forest with tears in their eyes. Naruto walked up behind her. He didn't gloat, he simply placed a hand on her shoulder. This is what we can do together. The stone doesn't have to be a fortress, Kuretsuchi. It can be a garden. Kuretsuchi looked at him, then at the women standing behind him, Hinata, Sakura, Ino, Conan, each exhausted but wearing expressions of triumph. She realized then that this wasn't a harem of concubines. It was a circle of deities, and Naruto was the sun that kept them in orbit. I was wrong, Kuretsuchi whispered. She stood up, turned to her people, and shouted, "The stone bows to the emperor. Long live the Uzumaki dynasty." As the cheers echoed through the mountains, Naruto felt a familiar presence. Tenten, who had been managing the logistics of the Imperial Armory, approached him with a scroll. Naruto, the messengers from the Land of Lightning just arrived. I is stepping down. Killer Bee says he's too cool to rule, and the people are demanding a new leader. Naruto looked at the new forest. One more nation to go. One more piece of the puzzle. Get the platform ready, Naruto said, his eyes turning toward the distant, stormy peaks of the hidden cloud. We have a coronation to attend. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Thunder's Submission. The Land of Lightning was a realm of jagged peaks and eternal storms, a place where the air hummed with the static of 1,000 years of martial pride. But as the Imperial platform crested the thunderclouds, the sight that met the people of Kumo was not a war fleet, but a celestial procession. Killer Bee stood atop the highest spire of the Turtle Island, which had been docked permanently near the floating city of Kumo. He wasn't rapping. For once, the legendary Eight Tails Jinchuriki looked solemn. Behind him stood Samui, her icy blue eyes fixed on the approaching golden light, and Yugito Ni, the resurrected host of the Two Tails, whose presence in the Imperial Court was a testament to Naruto's mastery over the life transmigration seals. The Raikage has officially hung up his hat, Samui said, her voice cool and professional. The elders are in an uproar. They say the cloud has never bowed to a king, only to the strongest. Then they're about to meet the strongest, Yugito replied, her nails lengthening into blue-flamed claws. And his better halves. The platform descended. Naruto stepped off first, his presence now so immense that the local lightning storms seemed to bend away from him, forming a halo of clear sky in the middle of a tempest. He was flanked by Mabui, the Raikage's former assistant who had transitioned into the Empire's chief of logistics, and Karui, who stood tall as the bridge between her homeland and her emperor. Yo, Naruto, the fourth gave me the word, B shouted, gesturing to the empty throne of the Raikage. He says he's too old to fight the change. But the Kumo Jonin, they want a test of the lightning's grace. A group of elite cloud ninjas stepped forward, led by Darui. Emperor Naruto, Darui said, bowing his head slightly. We respect you, but our tradition is the Raikage's gauntlet. To rule the cloud, you must prove you are faster than the lightning we worship. Naruto smiled. I've done enough fighting lately. How about we make this interesting? I won't use my feet to race you. I'll send my shadow of the cloud. He stepped aside, and Karui stepped forward. Beside her, Mabui opened a sealing scroll. Karui, Darui asked, surprised. You're one of us, but you think you can outrun the Black Lightning. I'm not the girl who left the village, Karui said, her red hair whipping in the wind. I've been trained by the Emperor himself. I've tasted the chakra of the 9 tails and the wisdom of the sage. The race was set, from the summit of the Turtle Island to the distant peak of the Blue Mountain and back. Darui activated his Black Lightning, his body flickering with ebony sparks. Karui, however, didn't use lightning. She closed her eyes, and a golden aura, a fraction of Naruto's own 6 paths chakra, shimmered around her. Go, Naruto whispered. Darui vanished in a thunderclap. But Karui didn't just run, she warped. Using a modified version of the Flying Thunder God technique that Naruto had helped her refine. Through her innate elemental affinity, she bypassed the physical space entirely. When Darui reached the Blue Mountain, Karui was already there, sitting on a rock, carving a small Uzumaki swirl into the stone. When they returned to the spire, she was standing next to Naruto, not even out of breath. The Kumo shinobi fell silent. To outpace the Black Lightning was impossible, unless you were Servin. A man who moved at the speed of thought. The cloud is a place of energy, Naruto addressed the gathered masses, his voice echoing through the mountain passes. I don't want to dim your spark. I want to harness it. Kumo will be the engine of the empire. Your lightning will power the hospitals in the sand and the factories in the stone. In exchange, no child in these mountains will ever go hungry during the winter again. He looked at Samui and Yugito. I need leaders who understand both the storm and the calm. Samui, you will be the High Overseer of the Northern Territories. Yugito, you will command the Imperial Vanguard. Samui stepped forward, kneeling before Naruto. She took his hand, her stoic facade softening. The cloud has found its sky, Naruto-sama. We are yours. Yugito followed suit, the blue flames of the 2 tails purring in submission. The cat finally found a master worth the claws. Killer Bee let out a roar of laughter, finally breaking the tension with a rhyme. The 5 are now one, under the golden sun. No more war, no more pain, the emperor begins his reign. That night, the celebration in Kumo was unlike any other. The harem, as the world called them, was growing. But so was the stability of the planet. Naruto sat at the head of a massive table, surrounded by Hinata, Sakura, Ino, Temari, Mei, Konan, Kuretsuchi, and now the women of the cloud. As the furs burned bright against the dark mountain sky, Naruto realized the prophecy of the great Toad Sage had been fulfilled in a way no one expected. He hadn't just brought peace, he had created a family that encompassed the entire world. But in the shadows of the festive lights, Shizune approached Naruto with a grave look. She was the Empire's chief of internal medicine and Sakura's right hand. Naruto, she whispered, the moon. We've been tracking the chakra fluctuations Tonari Otsutsuki left behind. Something is waking up in the stars. The world is unified, but the heavens might not be happy about it. Naruto looked up at the pale moon. His golden eyes sharpened. Let them come. They'll find out that this world isn't a playground for gods anymore. It's a home. He looked back at his council, his legendary harem of queens and warriors, and felt a surge of absolute certainty. The era of the shinobi was over. The era of the Uzumaki Empire was just beginning. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Lunar Shadow. The celebration in the Land of Lightning had barely cooled before the heavens themselves seemed to recoil. The sky, usually a vibrant tapestry of aurora and storm, turned a sickly, bruised violet. In the center of the palace courtyard, the Imperial Council gathered, their eyes turned upward. The chakra readings are off the charts, Shizune reported, her hands trembling as she held a specialized detection scroll. It's not terrestrial. It's coming from the moon. Naruto stood at the balcony's edge, his sensory abilities pushed to their absolute limit. He felt it, a cold, hollow hunger descending from the stars. Beside him, Hinata's Byakugan was active, the veins around her eyes bulging with the effort of piercing the atmospheric veil. It's him, Hinata whispered, her voice with a memory of a future that almost was. Tonari. But he isn't alone. He's harvested the energy of the Tenseigen to a degree we didn't think possible. He's pulling the moon closer, Naruto-kun. He intends to cleanse the earth of your empire. Cleanse it, Temari spat, her giant fan unfurled and humming with wind chakra. He's about 10 chapters too late for that. We just got the plumbing working in the sand. Naruto turned to his council. The dynamic had shifted. This wasn't a political dispute or a border skirmish, this was an extinction-level event. Sakura, Ino, Mabui, I need the global defense grid active. Now, use the Kumo spires to link the chakra of every shinobi across the 5 nations. You want us to act as a battery for the whole planet? Sakura asked, her medical seal flaring. I want you to act as the shield. Naruto corrected. I'm going up there, alone. Mei Terumi stepped forward, her lava-style chakra simmering. You have a court of the most powerful women in history. And you think you're going to play the lone hero? Naruto looked at them, each one a pillar of his world. I'm not going alone. I'm taking the vanguard. Within the hour, the Empire's secret project was unveiled, the Sun Chariot. A vessel forged from the wood of the 10 Tails husk and coated in the black truth seeker orbs Naruto could still manifest. It was a craft designed for the vacuum of space, powered by the 9 Tails limitless reservoir. Naruto boarded with Hinata, Hanabi, who had joined as the eyes of the fleet, and Konan, whose paper wings could adapt to any environment. As they broke the atmosphere, the world below looked like a shimmering blue marble, interconnected by threads of golden light. The defense grid Ino and Sakura were maintaining from the surface. On the lunar surface, the palace of the Otsutsuki loomed, a pale, ghostly structure. Tonari stood on the balcony, his eyes vacant and glowing with a terrifying teal light. The emperor of a dying world, Tonari's voice echoed in their minds. You have built a cage of peace, Naruto Uzumaki. You have tethered the souls of the strong to your own heart. It is a beautiful tragedy. I shall end it. You've got a real habit of talking down to people, don't you? Naruto said, stepping off the chariot. His imperial robes burned away, replaced by the brilliant, glowing shroud of the 6-path sage mode. The battle was not a duel. It was a cosmic collision. Tonari unleashed the golden wheel reincarnation explosion, a beam of light capable of splitting the moon in half. Naruto didn't dodge. He raised his hand, and the combined chakra of the 9 Tails and the imperial shield below, channeled through the love and loyalty of his harem, formed a barrier that swallowed the sun-killing beam. Hinata, now! Naruto roared. Hinata, empowered by Naruto's chakra, lunged forward. Her gentle fist had evolved. It was no longer just about closing Tenketsu, it was about rewriting the flow of celestial energy. She struck Tonari with the 8 trigrams, Empire's decree, a strike that utilized the combined prayers of the women on earth. The Tensagen energy within Tonari shattered. The moon's descent slowed, then stopped. As Tonari fell to the lunar dust, Naruto stood over him. He didn't finish him. Instead, he offered a hand. The heavens don't rule the earth anymore, Tonari, Naruto said, his voice echoing in the vacuum. And the earth doesn't need to be cleansed. It needs to be protected. You're lonely up here. Come down. See what we've built. Tonari looked at the hand, then at the women standing behind Naruto. The harem, that was actually a fortress of the human spirit. For the first time, the Otsutsuki felt a spark of something other than duty. He felt the warmth of the sun. Back on Earth, as the violet sky returned to blue, the world let out a collective breath. In Konoha, Sakura and Ino collapsed in exhaustion, only to be caught by the cheering citizens. When the Sun Chariot returned, landing in the heart of the capital, Naruto emerged not as a conqueror, but as a peacemaker who had tamed the stars themselves. That night, the palace was quiet. Naruto sat in the private gardens with Hinata, watching the now distant moon. It's getting bigger, isn't it? Hinata asked softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. The Empire? Naruto asked. The family, she replied. Naruto smiled, closing his eyes. He could feel the chakra of every woman in his life, the healers, the warriors, the queens, pulsing in a perfect, harmonious rhythm. The world was safe, the moon was silent, and for the first time in his life, the boy who had nothing had everything. But even as he drifted into a rare, peaceful sleep, a new scroll arrived from the land of iron. Mifune was reporting strange sightings in the frozen wastes, samurai who didn't bleed, and a coldness that even the sun's warmth couldn't touch. The Empire never slept. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Frost of the Iron Shogun. The Heat of the Moons. Confrontation had barely faded when a chilling wind swept down from the north, bypassing the atmospheric defenses of the Empire. While the shinobi nations had unified under Naruto's golden light, the Land of Iron, the neutral territory of the samurai, had remained a stoic, isolated bloc. But the reports coming from Mifune were no longer about political neutrality. They were about survival. Naruto stood in the war room of the Konoha Palace, the floor-to-ceiling windows frosted over despite the internal heating seals. Beside him, Tenten was unrolling ancient maps of the northern tundras, her fingers tracing the jagged peaks of the Three Wolves Mountains. The land of iron has always been cold, Naruto, but this is different, Tenten explained, her voice sharp with concern. Mifune's last transmission mentioned a white stillness. Entire outposts of samurai are being found standing at their posts, perfectly preserved in ice, but their souls, their chakra is just gone. It's not just ice, a voice added. Anko Midarashi, who had taken charge of the Empire's border patrol, stepped into the light. She looked leaner, her movements more predatory since she had been brought into the inner circle. I sent a scout team to the border. They didn't come back. The one guy who did was babbling about a shogun made of winter who doesn't use ninjutsu or kenjutsu, he just breathes, and the world stops. Naruto adjusted the heavy fur-lined cloak over his imperial robes. The samurai have been our allies since the war. If Mifune is calling for help, the Empire answers. I won't let the North turn into a graveyard. You're taking the heavy hitters for this one, Sakura said, walking in with a crate of specialized heating pills she'd developed. The temperature in the land of iron has dropped to 100 degrees below zero. Even your chakra shroud will struggle to keep others warm if we don't have medical support. The expeditionary force was assembled. Naruto, Sakura, Tenten, and Temari. They traveled not by platform, but by a high-speed, chakra-propelled sled designed to glide over the deepening snowdrifts. As they crossed the border, the landscape was haunting. The once bustling trade routes were silent. Trees were encased in crystal, their branches snapping like glass in the wind. When they reached the capital of the land of iron, they found the gates wide open. Inside the great hall, Mifune sat on his throne. But he was not alone. Standing before him was a figure clad in translucent, ice-blue samurai armor. He carried a blade that looked like a sliver of the moon itself. This was the Winter Shogun, an ancient spirit of the land awakened by the massive shifts in the world's chakra. The Golden King arrives, the Shogun spoke, his voice sounding like grinding glaciers. You have brought a summer that does not belong to this world, Uzumaki. You have forced the nations to bloom out of season. The earth demands its rest. It demands the great sleep. The people aren't ready for a great sleep, pal. Temari shouted, unfurling her fan. She swung it, unleashing a blast of scorching desert wind, but the heat vanished inches before it touched the shogun, turning into harmless snow. Tears of the sun cannot melt the heart of the world, the shogun said, raising his blade. The battle erupted. The shogun moved with a terrifying, frozen grace. He wasn't using chakra, he was manipulating the fundamental kinetic energy of the atoms around him, slowing them to a crawl. Tenten launched a barrage of specialized fire incendiary weapons from her scrolls, but the explosions were snuffed out instantly. Sakura leapt forward, her fist glowing with the strength to shatter mountains, but as she entered the shogun's zero zone, her movements became sluggish, her muscles stiffening from the unnatural cold. Naruto saw his counsel struggling. He stepped forward, but he didn't enter his glowing sage mode. Instead, he reached deep into the core of the Son Goku, the four tails, and the Matabi, the two tails. He began to radiate a dull, pulsing crimson heat, not a light, but a physical fever. You want to talk about the Earth's seasons? Naruto asked, his voice low. The Earth doesn't just have winter. It has a core of molten fire. It has the heat of life. Naruto grabbed the shogun's ice blade with his bare hand. The sound of steam was deafening. The ice began to hiss and crack. My harem, as the world calls them, they aren't just flowers in a summer garden, Naruto growled, his eyes burning with the orange slit of the fox. They are the ones who keep the fires burning when guys like you try to put them out. He signaled to Tenten and Sakura. Now, the triple seal. Tenten threw a massive sealing chain infused with the heat of the land of lightning. Sakura struck the chain, driving her explosive chakra through the metal. At the same time, Temari created a localized cyclone, trapping the shogun in a vacuum of friction-heated air. The shogun roared, a sound of cracking ice, as the combined efforts of the emperor and his elite guard forced the winter back into the earth. The translucent armor shattered, revealing only an empty suit of ancient iron. The temperature in the hall began to rise. Mifune, shivering and pale, finally let out a breath that didn't turn to mist. You saved the North, Mifune whispered, bowing his head from his seat. The samurai owe the Empire a debt that can never be repaid. No debts, Mifune, Naruto said, his heat fading back to his normal, warm aura. Just a reminder. The Empire covers the sun and the snow. We look after our own. As they prepared to head back, Tenten looked out at the thawing city. We're going to need to build permanent heating stations here. And I want to study that ice armor. If we can forge weapons that tap into that kinetic slowing effect. Always the engineer. Naruto laughed, wrapping an arm around her shoulder to share his warmth. Someone has to keep us ahead of the next disaster, she replied, leaning into him. But as the sled sped back toward the land of fire, Naruto looked at the horizon. The shogun had mentioned the heart of the world. It felt like a warning. The more he unified the planet, the more the planet itself seemed to be waking up to challenge him. He looked at the women by his side, Sakura, Tenten, Temari, and knew that no matter what the earth threw at them, they would face it together. The empire was no longer just a political entity, it was a living, breathing defiance against the very elements. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Shadows of the Deep. The victory in the frozen north brought a temporary reprieve, but the heart of the world warning haunted Naruto's thoughts. While the surface of the planet was now a unified map of gold and orange, the vast, unexplored depths of the oceans remained a blind spot for the Empire's eye. Reports began filtering into the capital from the coastal fringes of the Land of Water and the Land of Lightning. Shipping vessels, the lifeblood of the Empire's new global trade, were vanishing. Not into the hands of pirates, but simply disappearing into the abyss, leaving behind nothing but patches of bioluminescent oil. It's not the Mist Rebels this time, Mei Terumi reported via a high-definition chakra transmission in the war room. Her face was illuminated by the blue glow of the holographic map. Summit. Hing is rising from the trench of silence. My divers describe it as a singing darkness. Those who hear it don't come back up. Naruto stood with Shizune and Hinata. The trench of silence, that's deeper than any shinobi can reach. Even with breathing seals. Not for everyone, Shizune noted, pulling up biological data. The three tails, Isobu, used to dwell in those depths. Since the tailed beasts were granted their freedom and territories, Isobu has gone quiet. He stopped responding to your mental link, Naruto. Naruto's expression darkened. The tailed beasts were his brothers. If Isobu was in trouble, or worse, if he had turned, the ocean would become a graveyard. I'm going down there, but I need someone who can handle the pressure. I've already prepped the suit, Shizune said, gesturing to a sleek, obsidian-colored armor made of pressurized chakra-conductive polymers. But you'll need a navigator. The currents down there are chaotic. Hinata stepped forward. The Byakugan can see the flow of the deep-sea trenches. I'm going with you. And Shizune, you're coming too. If this singing is a biological pathogen or a frequency-based attack, we need the Empire's best medic. The trio departed on a specialized submersible, a craft engineered by the combined efforts of Kumo's tech and Kiri's hydro knowledge. As they descended into the midnight zone, the world of light vanished. The pressure outside the hull was enough to crush a mountain, but the Empire's seals held firm. Suddenly, the singing began. It wasn't a voice, it was a low-frequency vibration that rattled their very bones. My Byakugan, it's being distorted, Hinata gasped, pressing her hands to her temples. The chakra in the water, it's being vibrated at a frequency that cancels out sensory perception. It's a defensive barrier. I see it, Shizune said, looking at her monitors. It's a resonance, like a heart beating, but it's too big to be a single creature. They breached a final thermal layer and saw it, an ancient, sunken city of white stone, illuminated by the massive, glowing form of Isobu. The three tails was encased in a cage of coral-like crystalline structures that were pulsing with a dark, rhythmic light. Surrounding the cage were thousands of humanoid figures, the lost divers, standing in a trance, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light. In the center of the city stew, a woman with skin like pearls and hair that floated like jellyfish tentacles. She held a trident made of black sea glass. The king of the dry lands has arrived, she whispered, her voice carried through the water by pure intent. I am Amadare, the sentinel of the depths. Your empire makes too much noise, Uzumaki. Your bridges and ships disturb the dreaming of the great deep. Naruto stepped out of the submersible into the crushing weight, his six-path shroud flaring to create a pocket of air and light. I didn't come to disturb you, Amadare. I came for my friend. He pointed to the imprisoned Isobu. The beast is the battery for our silence, Amadare said, raising her trident. With his power, we shall drown the noise of your world. The water around them turned into 1,000 liquid blades. Hinata moved with a fluidity she had never shown on land. In the weightlessness of the deep, her gentle step twin lion fists became twin dragon vortices. She swirled through the water, redirecting the high-pressure needles away from the submersible. Shizune launched a volley of poisoned needles, each one tipped with a specialized sedative designed to disrupt the singing frequency. Naruto. The coral. It's not just a cage. It's a parasite. It's feeding on Isobu's chakra to broadcast the signal. Naruto didn't attack the woman. He swam toward Isobu. The pressure was immense, even for him. He placed his hand on the three-tailed shell. Isobu, wake up. The beast's eye opened, clouded with darkness. Naruto didn't use force. He used the link, the shared space of the tailed beasts. He flooded Isobu's mind with the memory of the sun, the feeling of the wind on the waves, and the laughter of the people on the shore. The singing turned into a scream. The coral cage shattered. Isobu let out a roar that sent a shockwave across the ocean floor. The dark light faded from the eyes of the entranced divers. Amadare fell back, her trident cracking. The noise, she whimpered. It's so bright. Naruto caught her before she drifted into the dark. It's not noise, Amadare. It's life. You've been in the dark too long. The Empire didn't conquer the deep that day. Instead, Naruto established a pact. The Trench of Silence would remain a protected sanctuary, and in return, Amadare and her people would guide the Empire's ships safely through the storms. As they ascended back toward the surface, the first rays of the sun pierced the blue water. You have a habit of making friends out of monsters, Naruto-kun, Hinata said, her hand in his as the pressure eased. There are no monsters, Hinata, Naruto replied, looking up at the shimmering surface. Just people who haven't been invited to the party yet. Shizune smiled, already recording data on the deep-sea minerals. The Empire just got a lot bigger. I hope the palace has enough room for all these new ambassadors. We'll make room, Naruto said confidently. But as they broke the surface, they saw a hawk circling the boat. It carried a message from the land of wind. A desert storm was blowing, not of sand, but of gold dust. The fourth Cage's legacy was stirring, and the heart of the world was far from finished with its tests. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Gilded Sands of the Past. The ocean had been quelled, but the desert was screaming. As the Imperial Party returned to the mainland, they were met by a SCO. Hing wind that carried a scent long forgotten, the metallic tang of gold and the ozone of a reanimated grudge. In the land of wind, the dunes were shifting into shapes that defied the natural laws of the desert. It's the gold dust, Temari said, her voice tight with an emotion between fear and fury as she stood in the war room of the Sun Palace. My father's signature. But Rasa is dead. He was sealed during the Fourth War. He was, Ino confirmed, her eyes closed as she channeled the Empire's global sensory network. But someone has tapped into the ley lines, the natural chakra veins of the planet. They aren't just bringing back a man, they're using the Earth's memory of him to create a golem of pure gold dust. And it's heading straight for the capital of the sand. Naruto didn't hesitate. Gaara is holding the line. But if it's the Earth itself fueling this thing, he'll be fighting a losing battle. Temari, Matsuri, Pakura, get ready. We're going home. Pakura, the Scorch-style Heroi, who had been revived and granted a seat in Naruto's council for her tactical brilliance, nodded solemnly. Her orange and green robes fluttered as she adjusted her hair. The desert remembers its own. If the Earth is using Rasa's ghost to challenge the Empire, we must show it that the living own the future. When they arrived at Sunagakur, the sight was breathtaking and horrific. A titan made of shimmering gold dust, 300 feet tall, loomed over the village walls. It moved with the slow, crushing weight of a mountain. Below it, Gaara moved his sand in desperate, sweeping arcs, but the gold was heavier. Sinking through his defenses like lead through water. It's not just a puppet. Gaara shouted as Naruto landed beside him on a sand cloud. It's drawing power directly from the tectonic friction of the desert floor. Every time I strike it, it just pulls more gold from the earth. Then we stop the source, Naruto said, his eyes shifting into the cross pattern of his Sage Six Paths mode. The battle was a masterclass in elemental coordination. Matsuri, the Empire's master of ranged artillery, unleashed a volley of high-pressure water seals that Naruto had infused with boil release. The steam created a localized fog, obscuring the Titan's vision and softening the gold. Temari and Pakura took to the sky. Temari used her fan to create a massive cyclone, while Pakura launched her incinerating flare orbs into the heart of the wind. The result was a fire tornado, a sun storm, that heated the gold dust until it began to melt and run like honey. Now, Naruto, Temari cried. Naruto didn't use a Rasengan. He used the magnet release he had inherited from the One Tail, Shukaku. He reached out with his golden hands, grasping the very air. I'm the emperor of this world, Rasa. If the earth wants to talk, it talks to me. Naruto began to wrestle control of the gold dust away from the planet's ley lines. It was a tug of war of cosmic proportions. The ground beneath them cracked, revealing veins of precious metals glowing with ancient energy. In the center of the Titan's chest, a spectral image of the fourth Kazekage appeared. His eyes were hollow, filled with the heart of the world's cold logic. The empire is a weight the earth cannot carry, the specter whispered. The balance must be restored through poverty and strife. Luxury is the death of the shinobi. That's where you're wrong, Naruto roared, his chakra flaring until it formed the massive golden avatar of Kurama. Luxury isn't the goal, peace is. And if the earth thinks we're too heavy, I'll just have to lift the earth myself. With a final, gargantuan effort, Naruto slammed the Kurama avatar's palms together. He didn't shatter the gold, he sealed it. Using a modified version of the Grand Sand Plane Shroud, he compressed the entire gold titan into a single, solid sphere of inert metal the size of a marble. The silence that followed was absolute. The desert winds died down. The golden marble fell into Naruto's hand, heavy and cold. Gaara landed next to him, breathing hard. You took its heart. No, Naruto said, looking at the marble. I took its argument. The earth thinks we've grown soft. Because we aren't killing each other for scraps anymore. We have to prove that our peace is stronger than their war. That night, in the heart of the Sand Village, a different kind of celebration took place. It wasn't just a victory party. It was a reaffirming of the bond. Naruto sat with the women who had saved the desert, Temari, Sakura, and Matsuri. My father was obsessed with the village's economy, Temari said softly. Looking at the golden marble Naruto had placed on the table. He killed for this gold. He sacrificed everything for it. And you just caught it like a ball. Naruto took her hand. The gold doesn't matter, Temari. What matters is that when the storm came, you didn't run. You and Sakura and Matsuri, you're the ones who keep the sand from burying the people. Sakura leaned in, her eyes reflecting the campfire. The empire has passed the test of the deep and the test of the gold. But the ley lines are still humming, Naruto. The world is waking up, and it's looking for its king. Let it look, Naruto said, pulling his counsel closer. I'm right here. As the stars shone over the peaceful dunes, Naruto felt a strange vibration in his pocket. The golden marble was glowing. It wasn't a threat, it was a compass. It was pointing toward the land of fire, toward the very center of the empire. Something was buried beneath the Hokage rock, something that had been waiting for the world to be unified before it finally revealed itself. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Root of the World Tree. The golden marble, a condensed heart of the desert's fury, did not stop glowing when Naruto returned to Konoha. Instead, the pulse quickened. It hummed in resonance with the very ground beneath the imperial palace. Every step Naruto took toward the Hokage rock caused the earth to thrum like a giant's heartbeat. It's coming from the foundations, Sakura noted, her diagnostic scrolls unfurled as she tracked the seismic vibrations. Naruto, there are tunnels beneath the village that don't appear on any map, not even the ones from the second or third Hokage's eras. They're older than the village itself. Naruto was accompanied by his most trusted inner circle, Hinata, Sakura, and Ino. As they descended into the depths of the mountain, the air changed. It became thick with a scent like rain on ancient stone and blooming jasmine. The walls were no longer dirt and rock, they were woven with massive, translucent roots that shimmered with a pale emerald light. These are roots of the god tree, Hinata whispered, her Byakugan tracing the flow of energy. But Madara's tree was destroyed. This is something else. It's dormant, yet it's feeding on the collective peace of the empire. They reached a central chamber where the roots converged into a pedestal. Standing, there was a figure that made even Naruto freeze. It was a woman of ethereal beauty, her skin like porcelain and her hair a cascading waterfall of silver white. She wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight. Kagaya, Naruto tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for a truth-seeker orb. No, the woman said, her voice like the chime of a silver bell. I am Shinju, the consciousness of the world seed. Kagaya was a gardener who sought to harvest the fruit. I am the garden itself. Ino stepped forward, her mind link ability flaring as she tried to sense the woman's intent. You've been waking up as the nations unified. Why now? Why did you send those spirits to attack the land of iron and the sand? I did not send them to attack, Shinju replied, her eyes, liquid gold, fixing on Naruto. I sent them to test the stability of the vessel. The world has been fractured for millennia. Hatred kept the chakra scattered, like seeds in a storm. But you, Naruto Uzumaki, have gathered all the threads. You have created a singular consciousness of peace. You have made the world a ripe fruit. I'm not a fruit, and neither is my empire, Naruto growled, his golden shroud igniting. If you're here to take what we've built, you're in for a fight. I am here to offer you a choice, Shinju said, ignoring his threat. The empire is strong, but it is mortal. Your queens will age, your walls will crumble, but if you merge your spirit with the world seed, you can become an eternal sovereign. You can turn the entire planet into a paradise where no one ever dies, where winter never comes, and where your harem will rule by your side for eternity. The room went silent. It was the ultimate temptation. To never lose Sakura, to never see the light fade from Hinata's eyes, to protect the world without the need for constant vigil. Sakura looked at Naruto, her hand trembling. Naruto, she's talking about an eternal peace. No more hospitals, no more casualties. Hinata, however, stepped closer to Naruto, her hand slipping into his. It's a cage, isn't it? A beautiful, golden cage. Naruto looked at the world seed. He thought of the struggles he'd faced, the blood shed in the land of water, the frost of the Iron Shogun, and the gold of the desert. A world that doesn't change isn't a world, Naruto said, his voice echoing with the weight of his crown. The beauty of my empire isn't that it's perfect or eternal. It's that we choose to make it better every day. We aren't your garden, Shinju. We're the gardeners. Shinju's expression didn't change, but the roots in the room began to lash out like whips. Then you are a weed that must be pruned. The battle in the root chamber was unlike any other. Shinju didn't use ninjutsu, she manipulated the very laws of biology. She tree. D to turn the chakra within their bodies into wood, to calcify their hearts. Ino acted as the anchor, using her mind transference to create a mental fortress that shielded them from Shinju's influence. Sakura unleashed her inner Sakura, at a physical level, her strength of 100 seal glowing so brightly it burned away the encroaching roots. Naruto didn't strike the woman. He struck the pedestal, the anchor of the world seed. He combined the sage art of all 9-tailed beasts into a single, localized point. I don't need eternity, Naruto roared, slamming his fist into the emerald core. I just need today. The explosion was silent but profound. The emerald light shattered into a billion sparks that drifted upward, permeating the soil of Konoha. Shinju faded, a small, sad smile finally touching her lips. Then live, little king, live until the sun grows cold. As the group climbed back to the surface, they found the village transformed. The trees were greener, the air purer. The test was over, and the empire had chosen its mortality over a god's stagnation. That evening, Naruto stood on the balcony of the palace, surrounded by the women who had walked into the dark with him. You turned down godhood, Ino said, leaning against the railing. The council is going to have a heart attack when they hear the emperor chose to stay human. I think they'll understand, Naruto said, looking at Hinata and Sakura. I've got everything I need right here. But as he looked at the golden marble in his hand, now cracked and dull, he knew the world was different now. They had defeated the planet's own defense mechanism. The empire was no longer a dream, it was a reality that even the earth had to accept. Far to the north, however, in the space between dimensions, a rift was opening. The Otsutsuki weren't the only ones watching the earth. And the new garden had just sent a signal across the cosmos. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Rift of the Void Walkers. The destruction of the world seed had sent a ripple through the fabric of space-time, a literal dinner bell for the predators that roamed the vacuum between worlds. For 3 days, the sky over the land of fire hummed with a low, dissonant frequency that made the birds fall silent and the livestock restless. In the Imperial War Room, a new face stood among the council. Tenten had brought her most advanced sensory equipment, but it was Moegi, now a master of the rare wood release and the Empire's chief of environmental security, who pointed to the anomaly on the holographic map. It's a tear, Moegi explained, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. Right above the Valley of the End. It's not an Otsutsuki portal. This is a crack in the dimension itself. Something is trying to claw its way in. Naruto stood at the head of the table. His imperial cloak draped over his shoulders. His golden eyes were fixed on the rift. The Shinju said we were a ripe fruit. It seems the neighbors have noticed. Who's on the ground at the valley? Karen and a squad of Uzumaki sealing specialists, Ino replied, her fingers hovering over a communication crystal. They're reporting sightings of things that shouldn't exist. Creatures made of obsidian and shadow, ignoring physical strikes. Then we don't give them physical strikes, Naruto said. Ino, link the High Queens. We're moving the capital's defense fleet. I want the Land of Lightning's ion cannons and the Land of Water's mist walkers on standby. As the Imperial Dragon ship descended toward the Valley of the End, the sight was harrowing. The SSIVE statues of Hashirama and Madara were being consumed by a creeping, oily darkness. Figures emerged from the rift, tall, spindly knights clad in armor that seemed to swallow the light around them. These were the Void Walkers, hunters of civilizations that had achieved chakra unification. Karen met them on the ridge, her face pale. Naruto, my adamantine chains pass right through them. They aren't made of chakra or matter, they're made of absence. If they're made of nothing, we give them everything, Naruto declared. He stepped forward, but this time he didn't call upon Kurama alone. He reached out to the council members who stood behind him, Hinata, Sakura, Ino, Temari, and Mei. This is the heart of the Empire protocol. We've practiced this for a reason. The women formed a pentagram around Naruto. This was the ultimate expression of his rule, not a man commanding women, but a nexus of power where their unique energies were amplified by his six paths core. Hinata provided the vessel of the moon, channeling her Hamura lineage chakra to create a stable container. Sakura provided the pulse of life, fueling the technique with her infinite medical stamina. Ino provided the bridge of will, ensuring their minds acted as one. Temari and Mei provided the elemental friction, heating the air to a subatomic level. In the center, Naruto raised his hands. Sage art, Empire's dawn. Instead of a Rasengan, a beam of pure, incandescent white light erupted from the group. It wasn't an attack meant to crush, it was an attack meant to define. By flooding the Void Walkers with the combined life force, memories, and elemental reality of the unified world, the nothingness of the invaders was forced into becoming something. As the light hit the Obsidian Knights, they began to take on color and weight. They screamed, a sound like glass breaking, as they were suddenly subjected to the laws of gravity, heat, and pain. They're physical now, Karui shouted, leading a charge of the Imperial Vanguard from the flanks. Take them down. The battle became a whirlwind of steel and fire. With the invaders tethered to reality, the shinobi of the Empire showed why they were the most feared warriors in the stars. Hanabi and Hinata moved like a twin storm of Byakugan strikes, shattering the now brittle armor of the knights. Sakura moved through the front lines like a force of nature, punches creating craters that swallowed squads of the Void Walkers. Naruto, however, kept his eyes on the rift. A massive hand, the size of a mountain, began to reach through. The King of the Void, Mei whispered. Her lava-style breath ready. He's too big for the rift. Then we close the door on his fingers, Naruto said. He looked at his queens. One more time, everything we are. They poured their collective love, their history, and their hope for the future into Naruto. He didn't turn into a giant fox this time. He became a shimmering silhouette of a man made of pure, white stars. He flew straight at the rift, his hands glowing with the seals of the sun and the moon. This world belongs to the living. Naruto's voice echoed across the continent. He slammed his palms onto the rift. The shockwave blew the clouds away for 1,000 miles. The massive hand was severed, dissolving into shadow, and the tear in reality began to zip shut, cauterized by the heat of 1 billion unified souls. As the rift vanished, Naruto drifted back down to the earth, his glow fading. He was caught by Sakura and Hinata before he could hit the grass. He was exhausted, his chakra reservoirs smoking, but he was smiling. The Valley of the End was silent. The oily darkness was gone, replaced by a strange, shimmering dust that made the flowers bloom instantly. We did it, Ino said, wiping sweat from her brow. The void is shut, for now, Naruto panted, looking up at the clear blue sky. But they know about us now. They know the Earth isn't just a planet. It's an empire. He looked at the women surrounding him, the warriors who had just saved existence itself. The world thinks I rule you, he whispered, loud enough only for them to hear. But it's your strength that gives me a throne to sit on. Temari smirked, crossing her arms. Took you 10 chapters to realize that, Emperor. As the sun set over the valley, a new era of vigilance began. The Empire had defended its borders, its depths, and its very reality. But Naruto knew that as long as they stood together, the legendary harem would be the shield that no god or void could ever pierce. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Seeds of the Sun. The closing of the Void Rift marked a turning point in the history of the Empire. The external threats had been momentarily quelled, but the sheer amount of celestial chakra released during Empire's dawn, protocol had left a permanent mark on the world. The very air was thick with residual sage energy, and across the 5 nations, a phenomenon began to occur that the imperial court called the awakening. Children born within the golden era of Naruto's reign were manifesting abilities that defied traditional categorization. They weren't just born with elemental affinities, they were airborne with bloodline echoes, shards of the power Naruto and his council had displayed. Naruto sat in the Imperial Academy's courtyard, watching a group of young students. One small girl from the end of Hot Springs was hovering inches off the ground, her hair glowing with a faint blue flame like Yugito's. Beside her, a boy from the sand was shaping glass from the air, a remnant of the heat Sakura and Gaara had unleashed. The world is changing faster than our laws can keep up with, Shizune said, standing beside Naruto with a stack of pedagogical scrolls. These children aren't just shinobi, they're something new. They're calling them the children of the sun. They're the future, Naruto said, his eyes warm as he watched a young Hyuga boy execute a palm strike that created a localized vacuum. But they need guidance. If we don't teach them that this power comes from the bonds we share, we're just raising a new generation of tyrants. The council had gathered to discuss the establishment of the Imperial Guardians, a school where the most gifted children would be trained directly by the High Queens. Sakura took charge of the medical and physical conditioning, ensuring the Eldrin's bodies could handle the increased chakra density. Ino established the Mind Link curriculum, teaching the importance of empathy and collective consciousness. Hinata and Hanabi managed the Eyes of the Empire, training the scouts who would monitor the ley lines for any lingering void corruption. However, the cultural shift wasn't without friction. In the outskirts of the Land of Lightning, a group of traditionalists, the Steel Nin, viewed this new generation as an abomination. They believed that true shinobi were forged in the fires of war and hardship, not in the luxury of Naruto's golden peace. They've seized one of the mountain academies, Samui reported, her face grim. They're holding the children of the sun hostage. They claim they want to re-educate them in the old ways, through pain and combat. Naruto's golden eyes sharpened. He didn't reach for his cloak. I'll handle this, but I won't go as the emperor. I'll go as a teacher. He traveled to the northern peaks with Konan and Karui. When they reached the academy, they found it surrounded by a wall of jagged iron. The Steel Nin, led by a scarred veteran named Raiga's disciple, stood at the gates. The emperor comes to save his pets. The leader shouted. Look at them, Naruto. They are weak. They have never known hunger. They have never seen a comrade die. They aren't shinobi. Naruto walked forward, his hands in his pockets. He didn't release his aura. You're right. They haven't known hunger. They haven't known the soul-crushing loneliness of a world at war. And that's the point. That's why I fought. That's why we fought. Strength is born from suffering. The rebel roared, charging with a heavy iron blade. Naruto didn't dodge. He simply caught the blade between 2 fingers. The metal groaned and began to glow white-hot. Strength is born from the desire to protect what you love. If you think suffering is the only teacher, then you haven't been paying attention to the last decade. From the windows of the academy, the children watched. Naruto looked up at them and smiled. Don't be afraid. Watch what happens when we stand together. Konan moved, her paper wings expanding until they blotted out the sun. She didn't attack. She transformed the papers into a billion tiny seals that settled over the rebels, gently paralyzing them. Karui followed up, her sword moving in a blur, disarming He Steel Nin before they could even blink. The old ways died because they were lonely, Naruto told the leader, who was now pinned to the ground by a paper spear. The new ways will live because we are a family. Naruto entered the academy and was immediately swarmed by the children. They didn't see a god or an emperor. They saw a man who had made the world safe for them to be kids. That evening, back in Konoha, the palace was filled with the laughter of the children who had been rescued. They were being fed a grand feast, and the queens were moving among them, sharing stories. "You're thinking about the next step," Hinata said, joining Naruto on the balcony. "I'm thinking about the legacy," Naruto admitted. "One day, we won't be here. These kids, they'll be the ones holding the world together. I want to make sure the foundation is solid." "It is," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Look at them. They aren't just learning jutsu. They're learning how to love the world you've given them." But as the night grew late, a strange signal reached the Imperial Communications Array. It wasn't from the moon, or the deep, or the void. It was a transmission from the far reaches of the land of Earth, a signal using a frequency that hadn't been heard since the era of the Sage of Six Paths. Someone was calling for the true heir of the Otsutsuki. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. The Echo of the Ancestor. The transmission was not a sound, but a pulse, a rhythmic thrumming in the marrow of everyone who carried the spark of chakra. It originated from the Cradle of Stone, a desolate, high-altitude plateau in the furthest reaches of the land of Earth, where the air was too thin for most to breathe and the gravity seemed to pull at the very soul. "It's a resonance code," Ino reported, her hands glowing as she stabilized the Imperial signal orb. "It's not meant for our ears. It's meant for the DNA. It's an Otsutsuki. Wake up, call, but it's coming from inside the planet." Naruto stood in the center of the council chamber. The atmosphere was heavy. The recent awakening of the children was now starting to make sense. The planet was preparing for a return. Kagaya was sealed, and Temari is our ally on the moon. "Who is left?" The archives mention a third pillar, Kuritsuchi said, having arrived via high-speed transport. "My grandfather once spoke of a tomb that was never to be opened, a place where the earth itself was used as a seal to contain a fragment of the sage's brother, or perhaps something older." Naruto turned to his most specialized team for this mission, Hinata, whose Byakugan could see the celestial threads, Kuritsuchi, who knew the secrets of the earth's crust, and Mei Terumi, whose elemental mastery could dissolve any physical barrier. The journey to the Cradle of Stone was a trek into a world of gray and white. As the Imperial platform ascended the final peak, they saw it, a monolithic structure of black obsidian, pulsating with a pale white light. The third pillar was not a tomb, it was a beacon. As they approached, the obsidian doors melted away. Inside sat a figure that looked like a living statue made of marble and light. He didn't have the manic energy of Kagaya or the coldness of Temari. He looked ancient, his skin etched with the history of 1,000 civilizations. "I am Shibuki," the figure said, his voice echoing not in the air, but in their minds. "The archivist of the branch. I have watched your empire from the silence. You have done the impossible, Uzumaki. You have unified the harvest without consuming it." "We aren't a harvest," Naruto said, his golden shroud flickering as he stood protectively in front of the women. "And we aren't looking for an archivist. Why did you send that signal?" "Because the great devourers are coming," Shibuki replied. "The main house of the Otsutsuki has sensed the awakening. They see the children of the sun as the ultimate fruit. They don't want your planet, they want your lineage. They want the empire to be their new cattle." The room grew cold. Mei stepped forward, her hands glowing with acidic steam. "We've fought gods before. We'll fight them again." "You cannot fight them with chakra alone," Shibuki warned. "They are the masters of chakra. To defeat them, you must use the power they discarded, the power of the soul's resonance. You must turn your harem into a chorus." He gestured to the three women. "The Hyuga's purity, the stone's endurance, the mist's adaptability. Naruto, you are the conductor. If you can synchronize your heartbeats into a single frequency, you can create a barrier that even the Otsutsuki cannot perceive. You can hide the world in plain sight." The training began immediately within the obsidian chamber. It wasn't about taijutsu or ninjutsu. It was an intimate, soul-bearing exercise in synchronization. Naruto had to open his mind completely, letting Hinata, Kuritsuchi, and Mei see every fear, every doubt, and every ounce of love he held for his world. In turn, he felt the weight of Kuritsuchi's responsibility, Mei's hidden loneliness, and Hinata's unwavering devotion. As they linked, the chorus began to manifest. A mellow dye of chakra began to hum throughout the chamber. The obsidian walls began to vibrate, and for a moment, the four of them didn't exist as individuals. They were a single, shimmering entity of gold, purple, and crimson. "The resonance is holding," Shibuki observed, his marble skin cracking as he poured his remaining life force into the seal. "But be warned, to hide a world is to change its fate. You will no longer be part of the celestial map. You will be alone in the dark. I've been in the dark before, Naruto said, his voice layered with the voices of the three women. I brought my own light. With a final surge of power, the chorus reached its crescendo. A wave of invisible energy swept out from the cradle of stone, racing across the continents, through the oceans, and up into the atmosphere. To any observer in deep space, the earth simply vanished. The heat signatures, the chakra signals, and the light were all folded into a pocket of resonant silence. The Otsutsuki ships, drifting in the void weeks away, would find only a cold, empty orbit where a jewel of a planet once sat. As the light faded in the chamber, Shibuki dissolved into dust, his task complete. Naruto and the women collapsed, gasping for air as their individualities returned. Kuritsuchi wiped sweat from her brow, looking at Naruto with a new, profound intensity. I saw everything, Naruto. I didn't realize how much you were carrying. We're carrying it together now, Mei said, her usual playful tone replaced by a deep, quiet respect. Hinata took Naruto's hand, her Byakugan deactivated, her eyes soft. The world is safe. For the first time in history, we aren't being watched by the stars. We're invisible, Naruto whispered, looking up through the obsidian ceiling at the sky. But we're still here. They returned to the capital as heroes of a war that was never fought. But as Naruto walked through the streets of Konoha, he felt the change. The chorus hadn't just hidden the world, it had permanently linked the souls of the leaders. The empire was no longer just a political union, it was a psychic one. That night, as Naruto sat with his full council, he realized that the legendary harem was no longer a joke or a title. They were the architects of a new dimension. But in the quiet, he wondered, if the world was hidden from the gods, what else was hiding in the shadows with them? End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. The Shadow of the Sun. With the earth hidden behind the veil of the resonant silence, a strange peace settled over the empire. The constant threat of celestial invasion had vanished. But the psychic link created by the chorus had an unintended side effect. Naruto could no longer hide his heart from his council, and they could no longer hide their deepest desires from him. The palace became a place of absolute transparency, where a thought was as loud as a shout. In this new clarity, a crack appeared. It wasn't a rift in space, but a rift in the soul. Shion, the priestess of the Land of Demons and a long-standing member of Naruto's extended court, arrived at the capital unannounced. Her eyes, which held the power to see the death of kings, were clouded with a milky white haze. The silence is too loud, Naruto, Shion warned, stumbling into the throne room. By hiding the world from the gods, you have turned the world's eyes inward. The collective shadow of humanity, the Morio of the spirit, is beginning to coalesce. When people no longer fear the heavens, they begin to fear themselves. Naruto stood from the golden throne, his presence now so dense it distorted the light around him. Speak plainly, Shion. What have you seen? A rebellion of the mind, she whispered. In the dark corners of the empire, people are falling into a waking dream. They believe that because they are invisible to the stars, they are no longer bound by the laws of man. A cult is forming, Naruto. They call themselves the unseen, and they are led by a shadow that wears your face. The report was confirmed within hours. In the prosperous cities of the Land of Fire and the Land of Lightning, thousands of citizens were entering a catatonic state, their chakra being drained into a central network. At the heart of this network was a shadow Naruto, a manifestation of all the doubt, loneliness, and repressed anger Naruto had discarded when he became the Golden Emperor. It's a psychic parasite, Ino analyzed, her mind linked straining as she tried to intercept the cult's frequency. It's using the same chorus frequency we used to hide the world. It's feeding on the peace we built. Naruto looked at his council. The women were exhausted from the resonance, but their resolve was unshaken. I created this shadow, Naruto said, his voice heavy. Every time I chose to be a perfect king instead of a man. I added to it. Now, I have to face it. We face it together, Sakura insisted. That was the point of the link, wasn't it? No more secrets. The empire mobilized not against an army, but against a dream. Naruto, Hinata, and Shion traveled to the Temple of the Inner Eye, in the Land of Demons, where the shadow Naruto had manifested a physical form. The Temple was surrounded by the unseen villagers and shinobi alike, standing still as statues, their spirits wandering in a fabricated paradise. In the center of the temple sat the shadow. He looked exactly like Naruto. But his eyes were a cold, abyssal black, and his shroud was made of violet flames. "Welcome, King of Lies," the shadow said, his voice a distorted echo of Naruto's. "You gave them a world of gold. But you forgot that humans need the dirt. You hid them from the gods, but you can't hide them from the truth, that this piece is a fragile illusion maintained by your will alone." "It's not an illusion," Naruto countered, stepping into the violet aura. "It's a choice. Every day, they choose to trust me. They choose to trust each other. Then let them trust me," the shadow laughed, unleashing a wave of pure, concentrated despair. The battle was psychological and visceral. The shadow attacked by forcing Naruto to relive his darkest memories, the swing at the academy, the look in the villagers' eyes before he was a hero. The fear that he was only loved because he was powerful. But Naruto wasn't alone in his head. Hinata's voice pierced the darkness. "You are more than your past, Naruto-kun. You are the man who gave me a reason to walk." Sakura's strength surged through the link. "Stop trying to carry the world's sadness, you idiot. We're here to help you lift it." Ino, Mei, Temari, and all the others joined the chorus. Their love acted as a literal armor of light, burning away the violet flames. Naruto realized that the shadow wasn't something to be destroyed, but something to be integrated. He walked up to his darker self and, instead of a strike, he offered a hug. "I'm sorry I left you behind," Naruto whispered. "I'm sorry I tried to be a god and forgot how to be a person." The shadow stiffened, then began to dissolve, the blackness turning into gold. The waking dream across the empire shattered. People woke up in their homes, feeling a strange sense of relief, as if a fever had finally broken. As the violet light faded, the temple of the inner eye became quiet. Shien looked at Naruto, her eyes clearing. "The shadow is gone, but the lesson remains. An empire without a heart is just a prison." "Then it's a good thing I have so many people to keep my heart beating," Naruto said, exhausted but whole. They returned to the capital to find the people celebrating their awakening. The cult of the unseen had vanished, replaced by a deeper appreciation for the reality they lived in. But as Naruto sat with Hinata that night, he looked at the resonant silence, still shimmering in the sky. "We hid the world from the Otsutsuki," he said softly. "But we found out that the greatest danger was always inside us." "What happens when the children start developing their own shadows, Hinata?" "Then we'll be there to teach them how to hug their shadows, too," she replied, leaning against him. The empire had survived its own soul. But in the far distance, beyond the veil of silence, a new sound was beginning to echo, a sound of a bell ringing from a dimension even the Otsutsuki feared. The resonant silence was being tested from the outside. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. The Bell of the Final Toll. The resonant silence that shielded the earth was not a wall, but a song, a frequency that required constant, harmonic balance. But the bell that began to ring from the deep cosmos was a discordant note, a vibration so ancient it predated the Sage of Six Paths. It was the celestial erasure, a weapon used by the main branch of the Otsutsuki to reset, plan. ETS that had successfully hidden themselves from the harvest. In the Imperial Citadel, the air began to hum. Glass shattered in the markets of Konoha, and the children of the sun clutched their ears, weeping from a sound they could feel in their very marrow. "The veil is fraying," Ino gasped, her hands bleeding as she struggled to maintain the telepathic link with the global sensory network. "Naruto, it's not an invasion. It's a sonic disintegration. They aren't trying to find us, they're trying to shatter the frequency we're hiding behind." Naruto stood on the highest spire of the palace, high Six Paths shroud flaring with a desperate intensity. Beside him stood the High Queens of the Five Nations, Hinata, Sakura, Temari, Mei, and Kuritsuchi. Their individual chakras were being funneled into him. But the bell's toll was growing louder, shaking the very tectonic plates of the world. "We can't just block it," Sakura shouted over the roar of the wind. "The energy is too vast. If we push back, the friction will burn the atmosphere to a crisp." "Then we don't push back," Naruto said, his eyes turning a blinding, incandescent white. "We expand. If they want to find us, we'll give them a world so big they'll get lost in it." Quote, Naruto reached out to the tailed beasts. Within his inner psyche, the nine gathered. "Kurama, Yuki, son, all of you. I need you to release every drop of chakra you have into the ley lines. We're going to turn the entire planet into a living genjutsu." "You're talking about a global scale Izanagi," Kurama warned, his voice a low rumble. "If you fail, you Won't just die, you'll be erased from the memory of time. I have my anchors, Naruto said, looking at the women surrounding him. The ritual began. This was the Empire's final accord. Naruto acted as the core, while the legendary harem became the catalysts. Hinata used the Tensegan remnants to stabilize the space-time fabric. Sakura provided the biological vitality to prevent the planet's life from being drained. Temari and Mei manipulated the climate to mask the heat signatures, and Ino projected the will of the Empire into the void. As the bell of erasure struck its final, world-ending note, Naruto released the surge. The Earth didn't explode. Instead, it multiplied. To the Otsutsuki observers in the far reaches of space, the Earth didn't just reappear, it shattered into a million phantom copies. Each one projecting a different reality, a different chakra signature, and a different history. The resonant silence had evolved into the infinite kaleidoscope. The Otsutsuki, eraser, a massive, eye-like vessel hovering in the void, began to fire its beams of pure annihilation. But the beams passed harmlessly through the phantoms. They were chasing ghosts in a hall of mirrors. On the surface, the tolling stopped. The sky turned a shimmering, iridescent gold. The people of the Empire looked up to see dozens of moons and suns reflecting off the atmospheric shield. Is it over? Mei asked, collapsing to her knees, her chakra nearly depleted. We're safe, Naruto whispered, his golden shroud slowly fading. The Otsutsuki can't hit what they can't define. To them, we are a billion different places at once. Quote, but the cost was high. Naruto's physical form began to flicker. By using the Izanagi on a planetary scale, he had untethered himself from reality. He was becoming a phantom of his own making. Naruto, Hinata cried, reaching out to grab him, but her hand passed through his shoulder like mist. No, you can't leave us. I'm not leaving, Naruto said, his voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. I'm just spread out. I'm in the wind, the soil, the people. I'm the Empire now. We didn't build this for a ghost. Sakura screamed, her diamond seal flaring as she tried to dump life force into his fading form. Come back, you idiot. That's an imperial order. The women of the council surrounded him, refusing to let him fade. They didn't use jutsu. They used the resonance of the heart. They began to sing, a wordless melody that carried every meal they'd shared, every argument they'd had, and every dream they'd built together. The children of the sun, across the world picked up the tune. A billion voices rose in a single, defiant harmony. The gravity of their collective love began to pull Naruto back. The phantom images of the RTH in space began to collapse back into a single, solid jewel. Naruto's flickering form solidified. The gold returned to his eyes, and he fell forward, caught by the dozen pairs of arms that had been his support since the beginning. He lay on the cold stone of the palace roof, breathing heavily, surrounded by the most powerful women in history, all of them weeping and laughing at once. That was way too close, Naruto panted, a weak grin on his face. Don't ever do that again, Temari threatened, though she was wiping tears from her eyes. Or I'll blow you into the next dimension myself. As the sun rose over a world that was now truly, permanently safe, the infinite kaleidoscope settled into a permanent, invisible shield. The Earth was no longer a hidden secret or a target, it was a sovereign realm. A fortress of the soul that the heavens could no longer touch. But as the celebration began below, Naruto looked at the palms of his hands. A small, black mark had appeared, the karma of the world itself. By saving the planet, he had become its living seal. The era of the Emperor was transitioning into something even more legendary. The world is quiet, Hinata noted, sitting by his side as the city of Konoha roared with joy. It's not quiet, Naruto corrected, closing his eyes. It's finally in tune. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. The Eternal Dawn of the Uzumaki. The world did not return to what it was before the bell of erasure. The infinite kaleidoscope remained as a shimmering aurora at the edge of the atmosphere, a permanent crown for a planet that had outgrown its gods. The Empire was no longer just a collection of nations, it was a singular organism of peace, a living testament to the boy who refused to be alone. 10 years had passed since the Great Resonance. The capital city of Konoha had transformed into a sprawling metropolis of white stone and lush greenery, where technology and chakra worked in perfect, silent tandem. At the heart of the city stood the Imperial Spire, a tower that reached toward the heavens, housing the High Council of the Empire. Naruto Uzumaki sat upon the throne, though the karma of the world on his palms had now spread into elegant, glowing lines of gold that traced his arms. He looked younger than his years, sustained by the collective vitality of the land and the love of his court. The delegation from the moon has arrived, Hanabi Hyuga announced, her voice echoing through the hall. She was now the commander of the Imperial Guard, her Byakugan sharper than any blade. Tonari sends his respects. He says the kaleidoscope is visible even from the stars. It looks like a blooming lotus in the dark. Naruto stood, his imperial robes trailing behind him like a river of fire. Beside him, his primary consorts, the pillars of his soul, took their places. Hinata, the Empress of the Moon, Sakura, the Healer of the Earth, Ino, the Voice of the People, and Temari, the Warden of the Winds. The hall was filled with the new generation. The children of the sun were now young adults, their unique bloodline echoes serving as the foundation for the Empire's new arts. They didn't learn how to kill, they learned how to create, how to sustain, and how to protect the harmony. The world is ready, Naruto, Ino whispered, her mind link touching everyone in the room with a sense of profound calm. The final seal is ready to be set. Naruto walked to the grand balcony overlooking the world. Below him, millions had gathered. He could see the red hair of the Uzumaki scattered throughout the crowd, the stoic faces of the stone, the fluid grace of the mist, and the electric energy of the cloud. They were no longer separate. They were one. People of the Empire, Naruto's voice carried to every corner of the planet, amplified by the very air they breathed. We began this journey in a world of shadows and blood. We fought gods, we fought the deep, and we fought the darkness within ourselves. But today, we stop fighting. He raised his hands, the gold marks on his skin glowing with a blinding brilliance. Today, the Empire becomes the light. We are no longer hidden. We are the beacon. With a final surge of Six Paths chakra, Naruto performed a single hand seal. The infinite kaleidoscope in the sky shifted. It didn't vanish, it became a gateway. The earth was no longer a target for the Otsutsuki, it w. as now the center of a new celestial network. The legendary harem stepped forward, each placing a hand on Naruto's back, their combined chakras merging into a rainbow of power. The energy erupted upward, piercing the sky and reaching out into the cosmos. It wasn't a weapon, it was an invitation, a signal to any other world suffering under the heel of the divine. The Empire is here. You are not alone. As the light settled into a soft, permanent glow, Naruto turned to his wives. Sakura was smiling through tears of pride, Temari was nodding with her characteristic smirk, Ino was already planning the next phase of global communication, and Hinata. Hinata simply took his hand, her eyes reflecting the dawn of 1,000 years of peace. What now, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked softly. Naruto looked out over the thriving world he had built, the gardens that never withered, the children who never knew war, and the women who had turned a lonely orphan into an emperor. Now, Naruto said, pulling them all into a final, warm embrace. We live. We finally just live. The Golden Emperor and his legendary council remained the guardians of the world for centuries to come, their names becoming myths, their love becoming the law of the land. The era of the shinobi was a distant memory, replaced by the eternal dawn of the Uzumaki. In the heart of the palace, a single scroll was left open on the desk, containing the history of the unification. The last line, written in Naruto's own jagged but firm handwriting, read: I once said I'd become Hokage so everyone would acknowledge me. I realize now that I didn't need the world to see me. I needed to see the world. And it is beautiful. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16. The legacy of the Golden Sun. The eternal dawn had solidified into an age of unparalleled prosperity. The world was no longer measured by the strength of its armies, but by the depth of its harmony. Centuries had passed, and while the physical forms of the first generation Hokage transcended into the legends of the stars, the essence of the empire remained anchored by the immortal spirit of the Uzumaki. Naruto sat in a garden that existed between the physical realm and the pure land. A space he had carved out with the help of the Sage of Six Paths, lingering wisdom. Here, time was a gentle river rather than a rushing torrent. He looked no older than the day he had unified the world. His golden karma marks now pulsing with a steady, rhythmic light that matched the heartbeat of the earth below. The young ones are asking about the beginning again, a voice teased. Sakura stepped through a trellis of glowing chakra flowers. She had mastered the ultimate evolution of the strength of 100 seal, allowing her to maintain her youth and vitality as the Empire's eternal matriarch of life. Behind her followed Hinata, whose presence had become so serene she seemed to glide above the grass, her Byakugan now permanently evolved into a state of divine perception. EY always want to hear about the legendary harem, Naruto chuckled, standing to greet them. I keep telling them it was a council of sovereigns, but the poets love the scandal too much. Let them have their stories, Hinata said, taking Naruto's hand. The stories are what keep the spirit of the Empire alive in the hearts of those who never saw the Great War. From the palace below, the sounds of a new festival rose. It was the Day of the Golden Bond, the anniversary of the unification. Across the planet, every person, regardless of their lineage, wore a small orange and purple ribbon. The children of the sun had branched out, their descendants now populating the moon and the newly terraformed outposts of the nearby stars. Ino joined them, her form flickering slightly as she projected her consciousness from the great imperial archives. The network is stable, Naruto. We've successfully bridged the psychic link to the lunar colonies. Communication is instantaneous. The Empire is no longer bound by gravity. And the threats? Naruto asked, his eyes turning toward the dark expanse of space. The Otsutsuki have stopped coming, Temari's voice echoed as she landed on the balcony, her giant fan now made of a shimmering, indestructible celestial alloy. The infinite kaleidoscope makes the Earth look like a supernova to their sensors. They're afraid of us. We are the only plane in the known universe that they cannot harvest. Naruto looked out at the horizon of his world. He could feel every life, every dream, and every pulse of chakra. He was the emperor, the king, and the legend. But as he looked at the women who stood by him, the pillars who had never once wavered, he knew his greatest achievement wasn't the peace, or the empire, or the power. It was the fact that he was no longer the boy on the swing. I think it's time, Naruto said softly. Time for what? Sakura asked, tilting her head. Time to let the world rule itself, Naruto replied. He raised his hands, and the golden karma marks on his skin began to detach, floating into the air like thousands of tiny fireflies. They drifted downward, spreading across the globe, embedding themselves into the soil, the water, and the hearts of the people. I'm giving the power back, Naruto explained. The Empire doesn't need a single emperor anymore. It has the collective wisdom of everyone we've taught. As the marks left him, Naruto felt lighter than he had in centuries. The legendary harem watched as their own marks of office, the seals, the eyes, the fans, glowed one last time before settling into a dormant state of balance. The era of the God King was over. The era of the universal family had begun. Naruto, Hinata, Sakura, Ino, Temari, and the others walked together toward the edge of the garden, where the sunset met the sea. They were no longer icons of a dynasty, they were simply a family, watching the world they had loved so fiercely continue to spin without their constant guidance. You did well, Naruto. The spirit of Kurama rumbled within his mind, the fox now a peaceful guardian of the planet's core. We did well, Kurama, Naruto corrected. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the lights of a billion homes twinkled across the globe, a reflection of the stars above. The empire was eternal, the legend was complete, and for the first time in his life, the man who had everything finally found his rest. End of Chapter 16. Chapter 17. The Sunset of the Gods. The transition from a world ruled by a golden emperor to a world governed by its own collective heart was the final miracle of the Uzumaki era. As Naruto and his legendary council stepped back into the shadows of history, the infinite kaleidoscope in the sky did not fade, it simply became a natural part of the heavens, a shimmering reminder that peace was not a gift from a god, but a choice made by the living. In the final days of his physical journey, Naruto returned to the place where it all began, the weathered wooden swing outside the Konoha Academy. He sat there, a man who had felt the weight of planets, now content with the weight of the evening breeze. One by one, the pillars of his empire joined him. Hinata sat by his side, her hand interlaced with his just as it had been through every cosmic storm. Sakura, Ino, Temari, Mei, and the others gathered around, no longer dressed in the regalia of queens, but in the simple, comfortable clothes of a family enjoying the twilight. The history books are already calling us the ancestors of the new sky, Ino remarked, leaning her head against a tree. They say we didn't just rule the world, we taught it how to breathe. They'll spend 1,000 years trying to figure out our jutsu, Temari added with a soft laugh. But they'll never understand the real secret. And what's that? Naruto asked, his eyes closing as he felt the warmth of his counsel around him. That you were just a knuckle-headed ninja who didn't know when to give up on people, Sakura said. Her voice thick with a mix of humor and 1,000 years of affection. As the moon rose, a moon that was no longer a threat but a home for millions, Naruto felt the last of the sage's chakra return to the earth. He wasn't fading into nothingness, he was merging with the peace he had created. He looked at the women who had shared his throne, his bed, and his burdens. They weren't a harem, in the way the world understood the word. They were the architects of a soul. I promised I'd change the Shinobi world, Naruto whispered, his voice drifting into the rustle of the leaves. I think we finally did it. We did, Naruto-kun, Hinata replied, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Now, let the children have the sun. We have the stars. In that final moment, the spirits of the legendary council and their emperor ascended, leaving behind a world that no longer needed heroes because it was filled with brothers and sisters. The orange and gold aura that had defined a millennium flickered one last time before settling into the hearts of every child born under the kaleidoscope sky. The statues of the Hokage rock eventually wore away with time, ground down by the wind and rain. But the legend of the boy who ruled with love, and the women who held up the sky for him, remained written in the very DNA of the planet. The empire was gone, the family was eternal, and the world was, at last, truly free. End of chapter 17. The end. And so, the era of gods came to rest. Not with destruction, but with peace. Naruto Uzumaki did not conquer the world with fear. He changed it with love, bonds, and belief. This was not the story of a harem. This was the story of a family that held up the sky. The empire faded, the legend slept, but the will of fire lives on in every heartbeat of this world. Because as long as someone believes in bonds, Naruto Uzumaki will never truly disappear. This was Will of Fire Stories. And this was not the end.